Milsons Point was a very, very friendly area. We had a close relationship with our neighbours and I believe a genuine concern for each other's welfare. Living in Hipwood Street was a delightful experience. Family life, there were 5 children, Mum and Dad and the 5 children. And of course we had a dog. Mum was at home all the time looking after the welfare of the children and Dad of course worked in the city. Of an evening we'd all get home in time for dinner, have dinner about 6 and then we'd usually take off for a stroll, a walk around Kirribilli village. We'd just take our time, the whole family and the dog, walk slowly around through Willoughby Street, Kirribilli Avenue, Carabella Street, Ellamang Avenue, until we got to about Admiralty House or the Royal Yacht Squadron. There was no traffic. I think we walked on the road most of the time and walked back on the road. And when we got home, we might go to the park for a while and have a talk to the other neighbours who'd be sitting there. We'd go home maybe and play cards. We might just listen to the radio.
In July 1923, hundreds came to a ceremony in Milsons Point, where a spadeful of earth was turned over. Work on the North Shore Bridge was about to begin. For years, North Sydney councillors, politicians and the expressly formed North Shore Leagues had lobbied for a bridge that would serve progress and property from the harbour to Hornsby. Plans had been drawn up and just as quickly shelved. But now there was a small man with the tenacity equal, it was said, to Napoleon III. He was the government's chief engineer, John Bradfield, and he was determined that a bridge would be built. Bradfield lived in Gordon and wasn't happy when he missed the last ferry and had to hire a rowboat at midnight. North Sydney, said Bradfield, would be transformed into a modern city of the world with gardens like Florence and Rome. There would be grass lawns and bougainvillea and statues lining the waterfront. As the first sod was turned in bitter rain, North Shore houses were draped in flags. North Shore residents burst into Advance Australia Fair, and the North Sydney Mayor declared that their own North Shore Bridge will be one of the greatest undertakings ever achieved in Australia. Lying in the path of any bridge was the densely settled suburbs of North Sydney and Milsons Point. Here was an energetic waterside community, the hub for the entire North Shore. Carts and lorries with business in the city came from Narrabeen, Northbridge, Mossman and Crow's Nest to cross on the vehicle punt.
My father was the greengrocer in Crow's Nest, where I was born. Now, to obtain his produce, you'd have to go to Paddy's Market, and to get to it, that meant going to Jeffrey Street Wharf, run the truck onto the punt, and go across the other side. As a young child, I was probably about 3 or 4 years old. What I enjoyed about it was the ice cream lolly boy who used to be on the punt. That was a treat for us. And then once we got to Paddy's Market, we did enjoy the so-called breakfast, if you want to call it that, which was Sergeant's pies, the pie of the day, and very tasty too.
Every day, tides of city workers swept down by train and tram to board huge coal-fired ferries that came and went every 5 minutes.
Yeah, well, I think they came in every 10 minutes and working in peak hours. And the thing was, with all these ferries up until wartime, the men would all stand on the sides, they'd stand up on the railing. The ferry would have a terrific list as it got into the wharf, wonder if they didn't go over. It was amazing to watch them. And the men would all jump off and run for the trams to get a seat. There were the poor girls that were women who wanted to come and get on the trams. They were basically lucky if they got a seat.
There were 4 hotels, 3 together, and the 4th hotel died was just up in the one block. They were all packed every night. They had to move the hotels away because they're underneath the bridge. But they made one stay down there. The hotel originally was called the Lilies and Leonards, the only freehold hotel on the north side of the harbour. It was changed into the Imperial. And as I say, in the First World War, the hours of trading were cut to 6 o'clock closing. And it used to be so busy there with the workers from coming off the bridge, but they had to get all about at 6 o'clock or 10 past 6.
North Sydney was already changing. By 1921, more people were living in flats and boarding houses than any other suburb in New South Wales.
For most of my childhood, I lived at McMahon's Point. Mother was a widow. My father died when I was 3, and we lived at Roma Flats, and then went to England for a while. And when we came back, we stayed at Air Court Boarding House, which was only 2 doors up from Roma Flats. At one time, Mother was manageress of Roma Flats, and we had a small flatette upstairs with a bathroom and everything. At Air Court, there were a lot of single people there, widows and unmarried women who were working generally in the city, younger married women, and younger men who were working in the city, and couple of couples. But there were no children living around there, except for some that I wasn't really allowed to play with. There was a back lane, which was Middle Street, and it was a lane, and the very scruffy houses, they're now all still there, and they've all been done up.
The Gilbert family lived next door. Mrs. Gilbert was a very, very nice lady, and Mum had the habit of inviting her in every afternoon for a glass of sherry. Mum would throw a peg over the backyard fence, which would hit Mrs. Gilbert's door. Mrs. Gilbert would say, "Coming, Mrs. Mungovern," and within a couple of moments she would be in and share a glass of sherry with Mum. The shop was adjoined to our house, which meant when Mum would run out of perhaps tea or sugar or something, we were able to knock on the side of the wall. The Wheatleys or whoever it might have been in the shop at that time would answer, "Yes, Mrs. Mungovern." We'd say we're out of tea or we're out of something, and I'd go out and they'd open the shop door a couple of inches and pass out the necessary groceries.
In 1923, work on the Sydney Harbour Bridge began, not at the water's edge, but at Euroka Street, North Sydney. The bridge was never simply an arch across water. For the bridge to function, far-reaching construction was needed that would reshape North Sydney. A new train line was built from Waverton to the new station of North Sydney. The ferry arcade at Milsons Point, where thousands had converged, was demolished. The ferries shifted. Tram lines were rerouted, and a new highway linking the bridge to Lane Cove Road would pass through the heart of Milsons Point. People discovered in maps, marked up with pink, that their home, their business, whole neighbourhoods would be demolished.
I do beg of you to allow me to hold on as long as possible. I should be left not only without a home, but without the means of living. Being crippled with rheumatism, I've been unable to go out and look for another house. But my next door neighbour, well, she's been out and about nearly every day, and she's been unable to hear of any place. And if she's much younger and more capable, and she couldn't meet with any success, there'd be no chance for me. Kate Lockhart, Fitzroy Street.
Thomas Jenkins had returned from World War I to marry Cecilia, who had set up her own grocery business in Alfred Street, and which they now ran together.
I sunk all my savings, deferred pay and war gratuity, believing I was establishing a home under perfectly safe conditions. Unfortunately, the resumption scheme has scattered all my customers, many having left in my debt. And I am in debt to a couple of Toms who are pressing for their money. At present, we are practically being starved out. Thomas Jenkins.
Those who owned property were compensated, but renters who occupied their home or shop by lease or an honourable handshake received nothing. They were given £10 to put their furniture on a truck and move out. When her lodgers fled, Kate Lockhart sold off her furniture to pay the rent. She moved what was left for £2.
I have to be satisfied with that amount, as I have no means of contesting the same. I've not a penny worth of other property, nor any friends to assist me, and I'm too old, 75 years, to again go out and get work.
In 1925, Labour leader Jack Lang was elected Premier. With New Hope, James McDonough, who lived in a single-room lodging house in Arthur Street, travelled to Macquarie Street to put his case.
A large number of the tenants are, like myself, strong union members and staunch Labour supporters, and look to and expect our government to stand by us. We only ask fair justice. I admit that our matters are small, but to us they are of very great importance, for it means that our living is being taken from us. We are to be impoverished to make way for a bridge that is to benefit the property owners. James McDonough.
Mr. Lang. Dear Sir, unless we can get a short interview with you, it means absolute bankruptcy. I feel very confident that if I can explain my position to you, which will not take more than 10 minutes, I will receive the justice I'm entitled to. Charles Langham, Milkman, Junction Street.
And the North Sydney Council, which for years had lobbied for a bridge, now lobbied for its residents.
The North Sydney Council is being treated by the government as if it comprised a lot of children. For over 2 years we've been hammering at the government over the question of compensation. And we feel that the disposed tenants and business people are being unjustly treated. And the least we can expect is that their claims should be considered. Edward Clark, Alderman.
I only ask a little bit of what I lost. To start again. Mrs. Pitcairn, Alfred Street.
Letters went unanswered. Deputations were ignored. Their losses, they were told by the government, were incidental to a great public project. By 1927, 470 houses had been demolished. Demolitions continued in 1931. More than 3,000 people, almost 10% of North Sydney's population, were shifted. 2 households remained, James McDonough in Arthur Street and Thomas Jenkins, whose young family still lived above their shop in Alfred Street. For Bradfield, there could be no interruption. He told his officers that they are cases in which possession should be obtained at once. Within months, both men had been offered work on the Sydney Harbour Bridge.
I happened to be one of the lucky ones. James McDonough.
We are standing now at 129 Alfred Street, and this was the shop frontage of Mr. and Mrs. Thomas Jenkins. The back of the shop cut through what we now see where the bridge is through to Willoughby Street, and Willoughby Street now continues over towards Milsons Point. Mrs. Jenkins I knew very, very well. In latter years, she was a very fine lady, very charitable, hard-working, and like many of the ladies of that era, suffered a lot of adversity due to the very difficult times of the Depression and certainly the building of the bridge. Beside the Jenkins shop, which was here, we have other shops going down towards the bridge, to where in the early days was the punt and the ferry terminal. There were hairdressers, estate agents, butchers, greengrocers, and this part of the North Sydney, or should say Milsons Point area, was a very, very busy scene. Well, there was no road traffic to speak of. Although there were many shops in the Milsons Point village, and we had a little shop next door, there were a number of tradesmen who came in their own horse and carts. There was the milkman who served his milk into a can which we would put out. There was the rabbitoh. The rabbitoh came round perhaps once a week or once a fortnight, and you perhaps buy a pair of rabbits for 2 and 6 a pair. There was also a very interesting character, the clothes prop man. He was the man who would come round the streets and you'd hear him calling, "Clothes props, clothes props." From the time the bridge was built in the 30s and say 40 years later to the building of the expressway, we've seen an enormous change in Lower North Shore. The bridge, of course, in its own way, demolished a lot of the houses in the area. The expressway has gone a step further and cut a swathe right through North Sydney. So that we now have two kind of distinct areas, the Milsons Point Neutral Bay side, and on the other side we have North Sydney and McMahon's Point. When they began work on the expressway, it meant that we were right in the path of the movement of all the masonry, etc., which had to be excavated from the proposed expressway. And the movement of traffic made life quite unbearable. So we decided it was time to move, and we moved up to North Sydney.
The church has always flourished best amidst adversity, and so here, amidst the ever-present, constant, startling, amazing scenes of change, the Church of God goes on.
Frank Cash was an Anglican rector who had had a passion since he was 16 for photography. Now in his new parish of Lavender Bay, there was a job for the priest with a camera.
The photographer must be in the near vicinity when the houses are being demolished. A telephone call that a fine wall was coming down in 5 minutes came with a hurried message, "Come on, we are waiting."
He was meticulous and recorded the demolition of Milsons Point, including the oldest Methodist church on the North Shore.
One must live here to appreciate the unprecedented and catastrophic overturning within sound of the parish church. Of course, our church life is deeply touched. On a pleasant Sunday evening, we get some 250 people, nearly 200 less than 2 or 3 years ago. The number of communicants at 8 o'clock on Sunday mornings averages a little over 30.
By 1928, work on the bridge had reached the water's edge, and Frank Cash stood beneath the granite pillars.
The closer the visitor gets into contact with the steel and stone, so much more is he amazed at the immensity about him.
Feeling that the hand of God was in the structure, Cash turned his camera to the bridge. He became a convert to engineering. He was the only amateur photographer given access by Dorman Long to climb the bridge, where he persuaded a crane driver to hoist him to the top of the jib and swing him out in a coal bucket. In the workshops at Lavender Bay, Cash became a friend to workers, management and staff who called him their mascot padre. He supplied them every morning with photos of the previous day's work that he had developed in his bathroom for the cost of the paper. And in sermons to the broken parish, Cash tried to turn their despair to joy. At Christmas, he held slideshows so that they too might see the bridge in a new way.
The Harbour Bridge displays outwardly the meaning of the image of God. The great bridge is being built before our eyes. The frail man is here walking upon the deck, but both the man and his work are signs of the truth of the sacred word. As the rock on the foreshores sustains the span of the bridge, so the rock of the Most High sustains the span of life.
In 1930, he published his sermons and photos in a book he called Parables of the Sydney Harbour Bridge.
I have much personal pleasure in offering something more to our people of Christchurch. The choice is yours absolutely. The gift is mine absolutely. And it provides an opportunity for you to acquire some original photos of what has gone from our sight forever. In those 8 years, the bridge has grown up to completion. Saturday morning broke, one of the prettiest mornings possible on the harbour. The streets within the vicinity of Lavender Bay were choked with traffic, and every vantage point about the waterfront was crowded with excited strangers.
On the 19th of March, after Jack Lang cut the ribbon on the south side, the North Sydney Mayor, Alderman Primrose, cut the ribbon on the north.
I remember walking across the bridge with thousands of other school children when I was 7 years of age. And our school and many, many other schools took part in this school parade across the bridge. I think it was the day before the bridge opened.
The day the bridge was opened, we first of all went up onto the flat roof of Roma Flats to see the parade of boats, decorated boats that went up the harbour. And then when the bridge was opened and the vehicle started to go across, I ran up Blues Point Road to St Peter's Church and stood on the stone wall around it and watched all the floats going past, which was really something.
That is quite vivid in my memory, how the thousands of people came to watch this great procession across the bridge, of many, many floats, of floral displays, surf lifesavers, industry, whatever.
I'll never forget, the bridge opened in 1932, but before it opened they had a trial run for the first train going over the bridge. And the noise in those days when the train went on the bridge was absolutely deafening. It was just a frightening noise. I was a young fellow, just turned 10. I was in bed and all of a sudden I heard this rushing train coming straight for me. I leapt out of bed, the noise, I thought it was going to run over me. And of course, it didn't run over me, the hotel was up just underneath the bridge. But the train went by and I thought, I'll never ever be able to sleep again.
The bridge had given work to some in hard depression days and ruined others. It was hailed as one of the modern engineering wonders of its time, became a national monument, more loved than any before, and it changed forever the community that lived in its path.
Was this spot, marked by peace and tranquility, Milsons Point?
It's like 75 years of the diamond.